Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. We are continuing our series of webinars, all free, that you can find at the wendymurdoch.com/webinars. We have made it so that you need to register for the free membership for webinars. And that's largely because we were getting hit with a lot of bots. So now you have to just sign in. If you have any problems, no problem, just pop me an email and we will get that sorted out for you. Tonight, my guest is Dr. Kevin Haussler. I am so excited to have him as my guest tonight. He's going to talk about proprioception, and I'm going to turn it over to him and get right to it because I think we have a lot to talk about. So welcome, Dr. Haussler. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just wanted to get just a little bit of background on myself. I'm trained as a veterinarian, but I also went to human chiropractic school and just got lots of insights as far as spinal dysfunction and problems there. From there, I was also then challenged about research and mostly looked at spinal problems in horses, spinal kinematics that I followed up with. And so that's my career. From there, I've also had some training in acupuncture. I was a founder of one of the founding members of the American College of Veterinary Sports Medicine Rehabilitation. So kind of have the chiropractic, acupuncture, physical therapy areas covered. And I think one of the things that's common to all of those is the nervous system. And so I guess that was part of the motivation, I guess, for joining and talking about proprioception. And so I guess just to start off, Wendy, I have used your products, the Surefoot pads, but I would just like to get a little bit of background from you. Why and where and when did you start thinking about proprioception and the pads?
Well, I don't know if you know what the Feldenkrais method is.
Yeah.
Okay, so I first got exposed to the Feldenkrais method in 1985 from Linda Tellington Jones because in 84 I had a horse roll over me and punch my femur through my hip socket and then kicked me between the legs when I got up. So I was not functioning very well. And I met Linda in 1985, and she had trained with Dr. Feldenkrais. And so that was my first exposure to the concept. Yep. And then I also apprenticed with Sally Swift. I was one of her last apprentices, full-time apprentices in 1992. Okay. So between the two of them, I was very exposed to these somatic education systems. Yep. And I did take the Feldenkrais training, the U.S. Feldenkrais training in 2001 to 2004. And then I studied with Mia Siegel, who was Dr. Feldenkrais's assistant for years, and did all of her training. So I trained in the method for 16 years. And it was from that really Surefoot was born, because I was working with my riders and doing things like there's a lesson called the artificial floor or grounding the foot using a board underneath the rider's foot. Yep. And so it was just kind of like an outgrowth from that and an experience I had with a horse that the horse came for a lesson. I'd been working with that horse and rider for 3 years using the Feldenkrais method. And he was short in the right hind leg, appeared lame. And that night I was talking to Dr. Joyce Harmon, and she wanted to stand at a computer instead of sit. We started talking about pads. She told me about how they were using different kinds of pads for dogs rehabilitation. And so I said, do you think it would work for a horse? And she said, I don't know, but time it for 15 seconds. So I took a pad out to the horse. The rider was already on. I stuck the pad underneath the horse's foot. And in 15 seconds, he walked off sound.
With the rider on the horse.
With the rider on the horse. And I actually do, I probably should have done this. Sorry, I could have done that before. But I do a lot of work with the rider on board for the many, I'll give you the reasons why. One, the horse has habits to its tack. So the nervous system, as you know, has habits, and it's going to react to its environment. So being in the barn, everything's fabulous, right? You're getting a massage or whatever. But when you put the tack on and you take them into the arena, that's a different habit. And so Surefoot can address those habits under saddle that you wouldn't see in the barn. And the other thing is that if I change the rider's perception of the horse because they feel the horse change, then I change that the horse can change because the rider's not holding the horse into a perceived limitation.
Okay.
So how many riders do you know that were like, well, my horse always falls to the shoulder? right?
Sure.
And they're constantly trying to train that. Well, that starts from the foot level. That starts where the foot meets the ground. And so if we help the horse have a better connection to the ground through the sensory organ of the foot, and the rider feels that change, suddenly it's not something that they're constantly battling. Suddenly they realize, well, wait a second, this horse can be different, and this horse can move in this way. And so it's no longer this perceived problem. It's now an opportunity. Wait, I got to do something different. Or the horse just changes and maintains it. I mean, that's the crazy thing. I've seen horses maintain from very few sessions, but also as a reminder to the horse's nervous system.
Okay. Because to me, that seems like a pretty big jump from Feldenkrais, which is kind of more body awareness and movement there, to, something that you're standing on. So, and you just made the comment, of the foot being the source. And from my background, I would argue that it's can come from the top and it can come from anywhere else too. So I guess I would like to have that conversation.
Sure.
Why do you think that you can have so many effects by a short session of a horse standing on an unstable surface?
So, all buildings have to relate back to the ground. Everything has to relate back to the earth. And so the horse's movement, I mean, I just watched the Olympics, right? And all these athletes have to relate back to the earth to do the things that they can do, the amazing things. And so the horse is the same in that regard. And in my experience, so with the Feldenkrais method, it's all about the nervous system, right? Showing the person new possibilities of movement. And it's really with Surefoot showing the horse new possibilities of movement, or restoring movement that they had that somehow got covered up or lost, right? And then that relationship to the earth is so critical, and that horse has to sense the earth and know where he is in space to do all the incredible things that he does with a rider on his back. So, the experiment was, well, what happens if we offer the horse this unstable surface? And the result is that the horses are so capable, much more so than people, capable of letting go of old patterns and resetting the nervous, and this is where I want to talk to you about this, is how do they reset so rapidly? Is it that it's already there? Is it, so yeah, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yeah. Well, I guess and I don't have the answer for that, because it does surprise me how fast some of our therapies from a pain perspective, even, chronic pain, can have immediate effects, but from a proprioception, mechanoreceptive perspective also, I guess the question I have is, why do some of those effects last and other ones are very short-lived? And so I think that there's still relearning that needs to go on, relearning. I don't know what that means for sure, but, or reprogramming, or whatever term people want to use for that. But I think that the nervous system is very plastic and responds to the immediate environment. I'd just like to continue the conversation about other avenues or windows into the body other than just through the foot, and, incorporating other things like kinesiotaping and, massage or light touch and stretching and those type of things too. So I think all of those afferent signals come in to the body, sight, hearing, smell, touch. I think those are big components, but how exactly all of that is modulated, I would have to refer back to Feldenkrais or, Alexander techniques or things like that for the neural reprogramming. And I don't know. I think a lot of that's beyond my capabilities of understanding, I guess. I don't know. Do you have insights on that?
Well, I think what we need to do is, for our audience, is drop back a little bit and have you define proprioception. So let's go there, and then we can cut from there, because we don't want to lose them.
Yep. Well, I guess let's just start off with that term. That term is probably being misused. So in our body, we have lots of receptors in our joints, in the fascia, in our skin, and those are actually receptors that can measure temperature, thermoreceptors. They can measure heat. They can measure vibration. They can measure pressure. And those are what we consider more mechanical receptors. So we call those mechanoreceptors. And all of that is within our body. And that's the proper term. And it's not until those signals get up into our sensory cortex that we actually recognize that my finger is bent a certain way or moving a certain way, because those signals can be blocked at different areas. I can block that with local anesthetic. I can block that with acupuncture. I can block it maybe with meditation, all kinds of different things before it gets up into my brain to say, oh, my hand is, this position or moving this way. So just like pain, we say, well, pain is in our body. Our pain is not in our body. Our pain is actually in our head, but nociception is all through our body. So we have nociceptors throughout our body. And it's not until it gets up into my cortex to say, oh, that hurts. Or similarly with the mechanoreception, oh, my joint is in a certain position, or, my legs feel uneven, or, I have an altered stance. And that's the proprioception consciously that we think about. So it's probably a little bit of semantics, but people always talk a lot about proprioception, but it's really mechanoreception, stretching a joint, stretching a muscle, feeling pressure, deep massage. Those are all mechanical signals that we're sensing with our mechanoreceptors.
So the proprioception only occurs then in the brain.
Once we recognize that, yes, just like pain, I always got upset because I'll just say that my wife had chronic migraines, and we went around to lots of different specialists, and oftentimes they would say, well, the pain is in your head. And I would literally want to kick them, and say, but then I figured out the pain is in your head. That is the only place that you can recognize, oh, that's a sharp pain, that's a deep pain. You don't see or feel that anywhere in your body, but you recognize that up here. And so I think we need to think about proprioception that way too, and that's why I kind of went back and asked about the foot, because that is where the mechanoreceptors, the balance, we're feeling that, but somewhere along that pathway from my foot up through my carpus, shoulder, up my spinal cord, up to my sensory cortex, that's where those signals are being modified or reset or reprogrammed, whatever terms we want to use. So there's pathways all along. Some of those happen in the spinal cord. And that's where oftentimes we think about horses that have a pinched spinal cord compression, wobblers. Those are the tracks that are carrying those proprioceptive fibers, mechanoreceptive fibers from the distal limb, and carrying those up to the brain. And if we get a pinch signal, those signals don't go up to our brain, and then we have ataxia because I don't know where my body is in space. And so those are some of the pathways that happen with that.
Yeah, that's really helpful for me, because I knew there were mechanoreceptors that we were talking about, and having talked to Dr. Bowker and looked at his work.
Yep.
And so this is great, because there was that little bit of, we're calling them proprioceptors, but no, that's kind of like you're saying, a misnomer. It's really the
kind of. Yeah, but I say, oh, my shoulder hurts, it's painful. It's like, well, okay, yes, if I have, or like horse have his hoof abscess, yeah, you think there's pain there, but it's really signals they're sending up to the brain that tells that horse, because that's the challenge when we talk about like arthritis. Some horses can have severe arthritis. We look out on x-ray and they say, well, this horse should be three-legged lame, and he's out doing his job. The next horse, you look at him and the x-rays seem to be okay, not too many changes, or he has severe things and he's okay with that. So there's not really a good correlation between some of the signs we see with arthritis and pain. And similarly, I don't think that there's a good correlation sometimes with our spinal cord compression and our change with ataxia. Some of our research I've had, sorry, if you want to go ahead.
It's really, really fascinating, actually.
Yeah, because, we've done a lot of work at Colorado State with a couple of my colleagues there, and we were mostly interested in horses that have neck pain, severe behavioral changes, and some of those horses would also have a lot of ataxia or incoordination. And, we've tried all kinds of therapies, and they were referred in, and unfortunately, those horses, we euthanized them, and we collected their spinal cord, and we couldn't find the typical signs of a horse that had spinal cord compression or wobblers. And so then we're like, okay, we're looking and we can't find any signs. So then we say, well, where else can those proprioceptive, mechanoreceptive signals maybe being mixed up or damaged or interfered with? And then from there, we looked out to the dorsoroot ganglion, which are little cell bodies along the spinal cord within the intervertebral foramen. And we've seen a lot of cellular changes in there, which we think might be a site of maybe mixed signals, because those cell bodies, they receive nociceptive signals, pain signals from the body, but they also receive a lot of mechanoreceptive. And so if all those little cell bodies are living together in the dorsoroot ganglion, and there's inflammation, or maybe there's arthritis of the articular processes, and that intervertebral foramen gets narrowed. We're seeing quite a bit of that now. And that's where some of the foraminotomies, where you're opening up the foramen, so make that bigger and reduce the nerve pain or nerve compression. And so that's what we're kind of thinking, that maybe some of those signals are being crossed in that area. And from some of the human and rat research, we know that sometimes my mechanoreceptors, the receptors in my body, they're supposed to tell me where my joint is moving and how fast, those actually change jobs, and they start sending pain signals instead. And so that's part of the plasticity, or crossing over, so that instead of doing one job, I'm supposed to be telling you where your joint or your carpus is, or your muscle, myofascial tone. And now I'm starting to scream and say, okay, it's pain, pain, pain. And it doesn't really have anything to do with mechanoreception anymore. And that's where we kind of get the wind up and the chronic pain syndromes. And so that's what makes it very challenging, because then those problems are no longer in that joint or in that bowed tendon. They're actually in the spinal cord, or it's actually up here in your brain. That's the neuropathic pain that we talk about. And then we get all these other, changes associated, neurologic changes associated with altered body awareness. I don't quite know where my body is in space. I think we have a lot of good evidence from humans with chronic whiplash injuries, that they have poor body awareness. They can't position themselves. They walk around like this because that's how their body tells them, I'm level, and the riders, similarly with their pelvis and shoulder, no, I should be normal. But you take a look at it, it's like, oh, well, I'm clear out of balance. And so that's the part where a lot of our nervous system kind of gets mixed up and mixed signals. And that's the challenging or the fun part, but it's kind of a hit and miss thing from my perspective, because I'm not that good or that knowledgeable to say, okay, here's the little magic key or the pill or whatever to reset your whole nervous system. So I guess
this is so fascinating, because years ago I took a workshop called Explain Pain with David Butler, and the NOE group in Australia. And he's written a book, Explain Pain and Explain Pain Supercharged. And he's talking about exactly what you're talking about, how the system gets hijacked, if you will. And instead of telling us where we are in space, it's reporting pain. I've used his technique with riders for years, and it's three-pronged. It's you have to recognize left and right. You have to recognize self.
Okay.
And then he uses a mirror to mirror the good side, which we're seeing they're using now with amputees and stroke patients and that
phantom pain. Yeah.
Right. And then the third prong is visualization. But we can't do that with horses. We can't tell horses, hey, can you recognize left and right? And can you use a mirror? I mean, it's like,
well, I don't know. I've always, because I've challenged with some of my sports medicine residents, we had a horse that had a head tilt. And so because of facial nerve and vestibular hyoid, temporal hyoid osteoarthropathy and fractured. And so he was walking around with a head tilt. And so as a sports medicine person, I'm like, how are you going to influence this horse's nervous system to teach it that this is horse, the horizon isn't like this, the horizon is actually like this. And we just had a conversation, and it was one of our ideas was to put up a big wheel on the stall and paint the top half white and the bottom half black, like the horizon, and slowly over time change that orientation. Oops, I just lost Wendy.
No, I'm still here.
Okay. But change that orientation so that the visual, as you said, can look in there. And so now my eyes are saying, oh, okay, now it should be horizontal like this. And then hopefully from there, because we know a lot of the neurology about the upper cervical with the eyes and the ears and the upper cervical for keeping my head on straight, that there's lots of vestibulospinal reflexes in that area that we can have access to the nervous system through vision, through hearing, or through, upper cervical. That's where some of the chiropractic, techniques, they talk about hole in one, or they just only adjust your first cervical vertebrae, which I think is, pretty biased, but obviously the whole body is affected. So I guess that's back to the comment that I asked is I think there's lots of different avenues that we can access that nervous system other than just the ground or the hooves or unstable surface.
Oh, without a doubt. That's the thing is, what Surefoot's been doing is looking at the ground interface with the foot and giving the horse new information that way, because, I always think about if you're going to build a building, it's got to be stable on the surface.
Yeah.
Right? And what fascinates me with Surefoot is how the horses adjust themselves. Like they start exploring and swaying and figuring it out, and then they walk off and they move different. And from a Feldenkrais perspective, I believe that you can make a change in one session, right? Yeah. And the question is, I also believe that you can make new neural pathways. But in those cases where I see these unbelievably rapid and immediate and profound changes, making new neural pathways doesn't make sense. That takes a little time.
Yep.
So what do you think's happening?
Well, I don't know, unless, like you said, that there are existing pathways maybe that are there that I've forgotten about. And it is almost like you flip a switch and it's like, oh, I can take this pathway, and this pathway gives me different results than this other pathway that maybe I was pushed off into because of pain or stiffness or poor fitting tack or rider imbalances. And so this is kind of the pathway that I was pushed into. But if you're given a chance or, just the right little stimulus, like the little key or whatever, it's like you can switch back, but I don't know exactly how or where that happens. To me, it would have to be somewhere up in here. Mm-hmm. From those different learned motor pathways, because, you referred to the Olympics, but, if I was a piano player, I would have certain pathways that I would learn versus if I was a guitar player, I might have different pathways, or if I was eventing versus, cutting, I might have different pathways there that way too. So I think we have access to that. And I don't know, I always think back, and it's probably a very big misnomer, but, they always said, well, you only use 10% of your, brain cells. And I'm like, well, I think we're probably using a lot more of that all the time, but I didn't know how exactly they measured that. But yeah, with some of our functional MRI now, we can understand some of those activations a little bit more. We just need to learn how to do that, those processes in horses and how they think and react to different stimulus.
Yeah. And, a few years ago, I was working with some wounded warriors, a gentleman that had severe PTSD and could barely focus or listen. And I have these things called look-up glasses, which actually I have a pair right here, in fact, and it's a slit. And I use this with riders to limit their field of vision, because looking down is what riders want to do the most, right? Yeah. But I gave them these glasses, and then I put them over the Surefoot pads. I make a balance trail. I just line up the different densities. And halfway through the balance trail, he was looking through the glasses, and he said, I used to do martial arts. And the guy changed like instantly, didn't need his cane anymore, could focus, it was like the wild thing. And it was like, he just went back. And that's, like when I see these horses, it's like they go back to a program that's somehow got turned off, and they can turn it back on. And it totally changed this guy. And it was mind blowing.
Yeah. The challenge is then, Wendy, how do you do that on a repeatable basis? And, I think that's just the thing working with horses and with people. It's just a kind of a hit and miss. And I just wish that I had better intuition or things that, this person is going to respond to walking across pads with these little funny glasses on, and this person might respond to acupuncture or whatever else. And well, I guess that's why we call it practice, because we're doing lots of practice. So
absolutely every day.
Yeah.
Every day. And yes, I mean, that's the thing, is that there's all these other modalities. And in my own process of healing from my really bad injuries, I've explored a lot of them. And that's, I kept coming back to the Feldenkrais method because it was about the nervous system.
Yep.
And that Feldenkrais said, we act in accordance to our own self-image. There were three primary statements. You act in accordance to your own self-image. You can't do what you want until you know what you do. Was another one that was really interesting. And that when we acknowledge, like when you're trying to change a rider's habit, but they don't know they're doing it, or like that horse with the head tilt, until that becomes conscious, you're not going to make that change because the individual doesn't experience it. Yeah.
Yep. No. And so I guess I'm still interested in kind of more whole body things here, because I'm just thinking, I'm just thinking about Temple Grandin. What she did was put herself in a squeeze chute, or some of the cerebral palsy. My younger brother has cerebral palsy, and they talked about putting him in a bodysuit that gave him mechanoreception so that he had better feedback or different feedback into his nervous system, and to be able to relax a little bit more from some of the very hypertonic muscles. And then that goes back to some of the, like the Pro 6, the wrap around the horse's body. I always have a lot of respect for Linda Tellington-Jones. I think she started off a lot of this, with a lot of her little funny names, that she came up with that caught things, and then the figure 8 around the body. But it's all mechanoreception. It's just getting the horse resetting their nervous system. If you're doing this, or, skin rolling or stretches, or, whatever you're doing, it's all of that. And so I think that she was another one, like Sally Swift was really somebody before their time to get a window or different access to that nervous system to be able to perform or help out with some of these things. So I guess I'm always just trying to look for other tools, because maybe I'm just not smart enough to figure out how best to use the Surefoot pads, or kinesio tape, or stretching, or chiropractic, or those things all together. What would be your approach as far as kind of coming at it from a new horse perspective, stiff kind of maybe altered body awareness in general? How would you do that?
Well, I like to think about keeping things simple.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of really fantastic methodologies that exist now that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago,
yep.
Right? I mean, we didn't have taping, and we didn't have PMF and all those things.
Right.
But so often they either require a lot of expense or a lot of training.
Yep.
And so, that's where I think the Surefoot pads are so handy, because they're not expensive. They last a long time, and they don't require a lot of training for the average horse owner to be able to use them and use them safely. And I think when I talk about that, all modalities can be abused, but all modalities can be used in a safe method, right? Yep. And so the simple is something that can start that process and may lead to, like, there's times when Surefoot doesn't work. Absolutely. Right. And it's like, wow, what's going on that this horse won't stand on pads or doesn't want them? It leads us into a further discussion. And I think all of these things, if we think of it as leading us into further discussion, maybe that thing worked right there and we're good and we're done, but maybe not. And what other things can we consider? I think when you look at Chinese medicine, as I understood it from like Joyce, the first thing they would do is talk to the patient, and then they might, do some massage, but they go from very, very simple, and like surgery is the last thing.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. And I think in many cases, we're too quick to go to the expensive thing without taking the time to explore the sort of simpler things.
The quick fix, we're looking for that. So how many injections can we do? And I think that's a big challenge. I guess back to your Surefoot pads, can you describe some situations or types of horses where you felt like you made the horse worse with the pads?
Oh, I can tell you one specifically. Dr. Joyce, who's a veterinarian in Northern Virginia, was using the lameness locator to work on all these, to get a baseline on all these horses at a therapeutic riding center.
Right.
And the one horse was a little off, and I was there and I put him on surefoot pads. And after that, he was worse. But Dr. Joyce was immediately able to go, oh, that's probably a soft tissue injury. So seeing that change helped him recognize, okay, this horse got worse.
Because I'm trying to use my body. Okay.
And I can't, right? Then, you know, I mean, I always tell people if there's any kind of a neurologic issue, they need to get a diagnosis, because an undiagnosed neurologic problem using surefoot pads can destabilize them further. And I think that's really counterproductive.
So I guess, how do you balance that? Because obviously, you know, we want to put horses on the proprioceptive pad, the surefoot pads, to help stimulate or have them develop their mechanoreceptive. But if they're already compromised, it seems like that's a pretty thin line where we're doing therapy or we're making them worse or aggravating them, the condition. How do you monitor that situation?
So I always say that horses get to choose. They get a voice and they get to choose.
Yep.
And this is where I think it's so important that we listen to the horses. And
absolutely.
You know, if I offer them a surefoot pad and I start with my lowest profile one, if I don't know the horse at all, it's only 1.5 inches. Yep. And the horse doesn't want to stand on it, I might offer it to a different foot or a couple other times, but I'm not going to force them to stand on the pad. Right. And I think that's the key is it makes us better listeners. You know, some people say, well, my horse doesn't like the pads, he won't stand on them. Maybe because he lost his balance, maybe because there's something else. And so it's about, from the Feldenkrais perspective, it's about exploration as opposed to, you know, this is good for my horse, so I'm going to make him do it.
Yep. Right.
And I think I always go back to this as an educational process. I'm not a vet. I'm not a body worker. I'm a riding instructor. So I never put on that therapy hat. That is not my hat.
Yep.
And I think that there are lots of people using surefoot in therapeutic settings and in a therapeutic way, but that's different than the surefoot program that I've created, which is based in the Feldenkrais method as an offer and an opportunity and an education and an exploration versus a treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you, obviously you have the riders stand on these and the horse, what's your system for doing that? Do you work with them both at the same time, rider, horse? What's the combination?
So, you know, if I'm going to work with a horse rider combo, I will take the rider off the horse and start with the horse, because I want to know, is this horse going to be okay with this?
Okay.
And so I check that out, because I have had, you know, I call it the bell curves. At the top of the bell curve, the horses won't get off the pads. You have to drag them off. At the bottom of the bell curve, I've had, and this was in front of Linda Tellington Jones, I did the pads, not a rider on board. I did the pads a couple of times and the horse fainted and fell over and laid on the ground for 5 minutes.
Ooh,
and Linda was standing there. This was early on in the process.
Okay.
Standing there, and I was having a heart attack because I thought I'd killed this horse, and she was not running over to do ear work. So clearly it was okay, but it fainted. And I've only had it happen once, and I never want it to happen.
No, I don't know in any universe where that would be okay, but all right. So, wow.
Really, and then I've had horses explode. I've literally had horses explode off the pads for whatever reason.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that's fear or pain or?
The one horse I think was neurologic, because I videoed him and I showed him to a vet afterward, and the horse, I tried it twice with that horse. Again, this was very early on, and his reaction was like it was going to kill him. Okay. And I think that when I showed the video to a vet and she watched the way he moved, she thought this horse was neurologic. You know, no diagnosis. I didn't have a diagnosis. And then another horse had been trained in fear. And I had used surefoot pads with him over several clinics. We're talking like every 6 months I saw this horse over a couple of years. And then one day he just bronked off the pads. And, you know, I think when you get these PTSD horses that have been trained in that much fear, I don't know if you've ever seen this with horses that have what we would call PTSD, but there's a moment where that discharge from the nervous system can be violent, right?
Oh yeah, it's explosive, absolutely, and dangerous.
So and that's why I'm always telling people, start with just 15 seconds, just offer, don't force, because until you know how that horse is going to respond, and maybe there's an underlying problem you don't know about, you want to be super careful. In fact, I even teach people, drop the pad with intention and see what the horse does. If he's already, going backwards,
right,
slow down.
Yep.
So fortunately, the majority of horses, and I have to say the large majority of horses take to this really easily, or this wouldn't be where it is.
Yep. And so
I'm always looking for those outliers.
Yeah. And so what about the behavioral component? Because we know that there's a huge behavioral component with pain, nociception, but I also feel that there's a big behavioral component to a horse that doesn't really know where his body is in space. I don't know how to describe that, if it's a uncertainty or if that's a fear or anxious. I don't know. Have you seen dramatic changes in behavior with some of the therapy?
Yeah, and I'm just going to correct you. I don't call it therapy.
Pads.
Okay. It's okay. Just I stay in my lane.
Yep.
So it's fascinating with the behavior changes, because I can't tell you. Well, I'll give you a case in point. There was a off the track thoroughbred barn, and they wanted me to show them Surefoot. I had 15 minutes, and I had I just had one little pad. And I walked in and I looked down the barn aisle and I saw this gray horse, and I said, I want the gray horse. And they said, no, you don't, because he's a butthead. And I said, that's exactly the horse I want. And she argued with me for a few minutes, and I said, I only have 15. That's the horse I want. They brought it out. I picked up its foot. I put the pad down. I put his foot on the pad, and all the behavior stopped, like instantly. And then I took the pad and I had the woman stand on it, and she flushed and started to cry in seconds. Now, wow. I can't explain some of these things. But my bottom line with that is that when you're not feeling well, you're feeling out of balance, whether that's mentally, emotionally, or physically.
Yeah.
And if something can help you ground and feel connected again, your balance adjusts so that you can look around the world and see what's going on. Yep. And I think with so many of these horses that they've gotten out of balance,
they just shut down.
And so you offer them something that gives them a sense of stability, and they're like, oh, thank you. I've been, I couldn't find it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's where proprioception or mechanoreception, all this is a question I have for you, because several years ago, after my wreck in '84, I started growing a bone spur. And so I went in to have the bone spur removed, and they found out that glute medius only had 25% of the tendon attached. So they put in 2 screws and they stitched up into the tendon and reattached it. I could not find my left leg for weeks. Yep. And I would go to my Feldenkrais person, and she'd be like, yeah, it's not in your map again. And my glutes would turn off. But finally, I was washing my Surefoot pads because I was taking them on a trip, and I threw the physio pad down and I stood on it. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I could stand on my left leg without holding on. And then I'd step on the regular ground and I couldn't do it. And I'd step back on the pad and I could do it. There was something about, and I think it has to do with the particular material that we use in that product. It allowed me to find the ground. And from that experience of not being able to find my left leg and then suddenly being able to stand on it, I can't explain that. Maybe you can from a proprioceptive,
Yeah.
But that experience gave me the understanding of what horses may be going through when we use the Surefoot pads with them.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy or image to think about that way, just trying to find yourself. But no, we have quite a bit of evidence about pain shutting down, reflex inhibition. So a couple studies, if you actually get a swollen joint, stifle, then your quadriceps will start shutting down and not turning on and off. So there's always that feedback. And I think that's the important part that a lot of people don't think about when they think about a muscle contraction. They only think about the motor axon that's going to that, but it's all of those mechanoreceptors that are coming back and saying how strong or how much range of motion or the timing of those muscles, all of that. So it's a loop, it's a feedback, and we need to have that. And then the gamma motor neuron is the one that gives our resting muscle tone. And that is always sitting there. So it tells us how tight our tendon should be, tells us how tight our fascia, our muscle should be for resting. So the difference between like a quarter horse and a draft horse, muscle tone, they got different gamma motor neurons that are activating. And similarly, if you have pain, you're going to ramp up in one way, or if you have compensatory gait, you're going to start using one half of your body different. And so I think that it's important, as you said, to kind of maybe just ask the body, where do you feel like you need to be here, and then help kind of guide in that way, kind of more from a osteopathic, indirect treatment type of approach to say, I'm here, which way do you want to go? And I think the pads and, all of our other therapies help out with that. So.
Wow, that's so interesting, because I hadn't thought about it from the perspective of inflammation in the joints shutting off the
Sure, absolutely. And that's where you kind of get that guarded, walk around stiff because I'm protecting, or, with your leg, you were protecting and shutting down, that whole part of your body to do that. And so we just need to retrain however we can move along. So I guess, Wendy, the other question I have is about, where did you come up with your densities? Because, we use them for different horses and, helping out that way, and then mix and match them. But where did you come up with your densities?
So, the company that manufactures my products is in Maine, and they're an old company. They've been around a long time. When we went to them, they had 3,000 different foams for us to choose from.
Wow. Okay.
And so, we started eliminating a lot right away.
Yeah.
And then we started experimenting with, it's really interesting because you want something that's going to give, but it can't give too much, right? And it also has to be somewhat durable, which, right? Yep. So we were always kind of playing with this difference between the durability. We actually made some pads that we tested with the draft horses at Disney World down in Florida, and they didn't even make a dent in them. So we're like, okay, that's too hard.
Wow, I would say, yes. And even to get their foot on the pad. So, yeah.
They're a nice big pad, but we don't put the horse on it, and nothing happened. And we're like, okay, that's too hard. And then on the soft side, there's only so soft before it doesn't have enough integrity. So we eliminated that down. And this company has prioritized formulas that they have to their company. In fact, I will give you a little secret that our hard material, which is in the physio pads and it's in the hard pad, I don't know if it still is, but it was the highest rated impact foam on the market. And it was in all your football helmets and some of your riding helmets. And I think that's that material is the one that, like the farriers are using, that I used when I had my surgery. It gives to heat and pressure, but it doesn't have any lateral give. And, there's something about that material as a high impact foam that it just seems to give the kind of support, but it gives it. I can't explain it, but I've seen that material do amazing things with horses. And so many people want to get into the more unstable foams, but that one, like if I have a horse that's anything but okay, right? Has behavior issues or mental issues, or, has had a lameness or been injured, I start there. And there's something about it that just, it's not over challenging. And there isn't anything else like that I know of that does quite what that material does. It's really fascinating. I wish do you know Stephen Adair?
Yeah, I know Steve. Yeah.
Well, prior to COVID, we sent him down a couple of sets of pads, and he actually ran it through UT Tennessee's in fact, I talked to him not too long ago. They got all the material characteristics from the different pads, and he was going to look at the different pad densities in relation to muscle activation. But, COVID hit and all that kind of got put to the wayside, and sadly.
Uh-oh. Okay. Well, that's not so good.
Yeah, I know. But I did talk to him at the AETT, and hopefully he will be able to get back on track. Somebody's asked us, there have been any studies comparing the efficacy of the different types of materials? That's what he would have done. He would have looked at the different materials and then seen what kind of muscle activation. But, we do have a couple of small studies out there. One was done by a woman in the UK, and pretty sure she just used the hard pads. And it was a 6-week study, and she was looking at protraction, retraction, and top line, and saw significant improvement in top line. And that's all they did was the Surefoot pads. I can send you that study. But the thing and this is where, Surefoot has so many different effects. The thing that she noticed that I find the most interesting, and this, I want to talk to you about this, that she only used one facility to do the study. So the horses were led to that place. And at first they didn't want to go. And by the end, they were running to get there pretty much. Okay. And their change in behavior and their facial expression. So I'm hoping that she does a further study and looks at the ethology of the horses. Because I think that as important as it is therapeutically, there's a well-being
mentally, behavior,
right, aspect that I think gets overlooked. And that's where the horse owner, for me, that's the really important thing, is you want to look after the well-being of your horse. This is a way to do that.
And that goes back to Linda Tellington-Jones. She made all the comments about all the claims about everything, but I think the bottom line was it just made you more relatable to your horse and understood what was happening there, developed that connection. So,
Well, the hard pads are the orange ones.
Orange ones. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
And so, this whole thing about, offering horses, I talk about, and of course from Linda, offering horses a voice and a choice. And by offering, we see these horses respond. And, very often they'll just put their whiskers on me or just kind of nuzzle me. And so my question is, do you think that's oxytocin?
I have no idea. I think most of the time we simplify things way too much.
Okay.
I went through acupuncture training and they talked about all the neurophysiologic, all the hormones and epinephrine and norepinephrine and, all of these things. And I always tell owners that when I'm doing acupuncture, I have no idea what's happening when I'm putting that needle in. Could be 1,000 different molecular, cellular, behavioral changes. I just hope that it's moves in the right direction and not in the wrong direction.
Oh,
so,
well, and that's the same with the pads. It's I don't know how they're working. I just know they work, and I know they work because the horses show me that they work. Yeah,
and if we start talking about hormones and molecules, that's where all of our omic research is, so that you can learn about all the proteins, you can learn about all the lipids, you can learn about all the RNA. And it's just there's literally thousands of these compounds out there. So, when somebody says, oh, well, it's oxytocin or it's cortisol or whatever, or serotonin, or I'm just like, well, could be, but could be a million other things too. So it just makes those things pretty challenging to understand, I think, sometimes.
So I assume that you use Surefoot in combination with other modalities.
Yeah. We've done research looking at more postural sway with the Surefoot pads. We were doing a study on horses that had neck pain, and we're treating them and we were just looking for outcome measures. So one of those was range of motion, baited carrot stretches. One of them was lameness locator. One of them was how much they swayed standing on proprioceptive pads. Normal stance, base narrow, base wide, similar to some of the work that Melissa King has done with some of her postural sway. And so just have a little iPad or iPod, little thing that you put on a surcingle that we stuck on the withers. And we just measured how much they wiggled side to side and back and forth. And we could put them on there and measure how those changes in their stability changed over time. I'd have to go back and look at the results of that. But so no, I've used those. Would like to continue some of that research to better understand some of the details about how to better use that. And so, I'm just always intrigued about horses that don't stand square. They always have this right front out in front. I'm like, their body, and most of the time we would say, oh, well, that's pain. So they're just guarding themselves there too. But after a period of time, we've treated the pain or we trot them off and, they're maybe not so much. I think oftentimes we forget about the mechanoreception. I've always been intrigued because when we do nerve blocks, joint blocks, we inject local anesthetic and we make the assumption we're blocking the pain. We're blocking the nociception. But if you've ever been to the dentist and you've had lidocaine, blah, 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 you just feel like your whole mouth is like this and you look in the mirror and it's like, I'm normal, but everything is off. And so just to the horse, when you walk in the horse and you ask them to trot off, they got to be feeling something very different than just the pain going away. And so that's where, again, I'm very interested in about mechanoreception and looking at horses that have back pain or, in pin spinous process, we inject local anesthetic or into the cervical articular processes or other sacroiliac joint injections. Are we really taking away pain or are we really changing how that nervous system is receiving those signals? And can we use that to reset their nervous system? Because there's one study about injecting local anesthetic in the back and it changed how they move their back. And so I'm just interested, again, other avenues or access to the nervous system.
Yeah, and Deanna's saying that pads are an interesting way to see loading patterns. And yes, we've had people do that with taking photos and then over time and that sort of thing. So the bottom line, I think, is that is the only place everything is perceived is in the head, whether it's horse, human, mammal. And so, if I had my ideal opportunity for a study, I would love to see an MRI of a horse while they're on pads. Like there's a word for that.
Okay.
Because what's lighting up in the brain?
The functional MRI.
That's it. Functional MRI. That's the one. That's the word.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's lighting up in the brain, and can we see how that's happening? Because it's happening, in my opinion, throughout the brain. Because you see the parasympathetic response, you see the mechanoreceptor, proprioceptive response. Mm-hmm. You see this restoration of movement. Is that hitting what's happening in the cerebellum? I mean, that would be my ideal. That's my building crust.
Well, that's a lot to ask for, I'm afraid. So, yeah.
We're not there yet, are we?
No, I don't think so. I have a question about shoes.
Yeah.
What influence do the shoes make on pads and body awareness from your perspective?
So that's a great question, because in the very beginning, I was asked so often whether or not shoes made a difference. And my conclusion is that I've seen horses in different kinds of boots, barefoot, and shod, and all different kinds of shoeings. And I had a horse one time. It was down in Costa Rica. I was down there for a retreat, and we had this horse that we were using, and he had the worst feet. They were horrendous. And the farrier came in tight with clinches, and that's all he did. I put this horse on surefoot pads during the break between the classes. And prior to that, he was grumpy. He wouldn't cooperate. He was all kinds of behavioral issues.
Sure.
After we did surefoot, he would do what I asked. We didn't change his feet, but we changed his behavior. So there's one level where it doesn't matter, but on the other level, it absolutely matters, because a poorly shod horse or an out of balance horse, right? Yeah. And the question that I kind of ask myself is, are we just palliative using pads with horses that are poorly shod, or even trimmed? I mean, if it's a bad trim, or if we give this mechanoreceptor input to change the proprioception, to change the horse's balance, does that then reflect in the feet so that the farrier can do a better job? And there's some evidence for that. There was a paper that was done in France where they took a horse, pulled his shoes, put him on surefoot pads over a period of, I think, 4 weeks, and they saw the shape of the foot change just using surefoot pads. So when you change the load, right, when you rebalance the load, it's going to change the shape of the foot. So the answer is it depends, I guess. You know, if that's really the thing that's holding the horse back, then you've got to address that. But there's times where I see people using surefoot to great effect. And when I look at the feet, would I love to see them in a different balance? Yeah, but are they still having, you know, are they just using the pads to keep the horse working well in spite of the shoeing? You know, it's hard to say. So it depends.
I understand completely. That was my typical response. Well, it just depends. What about the difference between the front limbs and the hind limbs? Because sometimes we'll put pads on the front and not on the back, and then sometimes all four. What is your sense? Do you think that it's more, you know, we talk about the horse having more weight bearing in the forelimbs compared to the hind, but the hind is obviously a very important part for propulsion and those things. So from your perspective, do you see differences between the fore and the hind?
Yeah. And okay, for a safety perspective, I typically start in the front because what I find with the back end, and this is just my gut feeling, I think so many horses are uncomfortable loading the weight onto the forehand that they are difficult to pick up the back feet. And they, you know, and they're thinking, when I first start with a back foot, they think, you know, how long is it going to be held? And there's all this tension. And then when I put it on a pad, they're like, oh, right. So, you know, while I can't assess this horse has pain here, I do see that I start with the front just because it's easier from the user perspective. But when I can, and I put slants behind and typically heel high, and the horses, a lot of horses, that's what they just really, they stand on it, they relax, they let down. Again, with Linda Tellington-Jones, and this was at Equitana in Essen, Germany, she had a horse in her class, and I came in with the pads, and he only wanted the hard pads under his back feet. And you could obviously see his pelvis was not right. And when he came back that afternoon, his pelvis was level.
Okay. And that was with the wedge in the back?
Oh, that was just the flat. He didn't want the wedge. That was just flat, hard pads. I mean, this is what fascinates me, is that given the opportunity, how much the body, the horse, will readjust itself if it has the opportunity. And again, it can be with any modality. You'll see it with any modality, but you take that stressor off, or you provide that little piece of information, and it's like, oh, I can do this now, right? Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
No. How about where did the idea about the wedge pads come in then?
So that was pretty early on. I was in Colorado. I was at Louis and Goodyear's. Okay. My first pair of slants, what's his name? Her husband, whom she calls a different name, so now I can't remember his real name. No. I just wanted to try an angle, and he made the first pair of slants, which were made out of wood. And then I was at MSU with Dr. Clayton, and we were doing an experiment, and I had the wood slants, and the horse stepped off and it whacked her in the shins. And it's like, okay, I got to make these out of foam. The horse was fine, but it was clear that I needed something that had more give to it. So that's when we started making the slant pads. But, you know, when I put people on it, and this is the thing is, you know, humans can give me feedback that horses can't. When I have people stand on that pad heel high, and I just have them soften their knees, because a horse can't lock his stifles the way we can lock our knees, they all, you watch them all shift back in their balance, and they all report that their lower back softens and lengthens. So, you know, while I can't say that that is what's happening in the horses, I find that there are a lot of horses that really like standing on those angled pads with their back feet. And again, if it's a, you know, an NPA, are we alleviating something from the stress of the, you know, the negative palmar angle? That, is affecting up the chain, but then you also see a lot of muscle activation around the stifle. So you can actually watch the stifles. And this is where I think people have to be careful with duration. I think too many people they say, oh, I only used it for 5 minutes. I'm like, 5 minutes is really long when you start a new program, right?
Yeah.
So, like 15 seconds was what I did in the beginning and saw a complete change.
Wow.
Yeah, that first horse was 15 seconds. It changed my life. And like my accident and that horse changed my life in 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And so that's where, you can always do more, but you can't undo it if you made them sore, if you did it too long.
Right.
And recently I had somebody contact me that, a vet recommended Surefoot, but he had the horse on it for 20 minutes and wondered why he kind of collapsed when he stepped off. And I was like,
he's fatigued.
Exactly. And people don't appreciate how much work it is to use muscles you haven't been using.
Yeah. Well, if you had to stand on a water bed or air mattress, that's fatiguing. Yeah.
Right. And I just, I have riders that with their horses that have worked up to 5 minutes or longer, but the horse knows it can step off. And it's like any exercise program for a person. Like you look at all these athletes at the Olympics, they didn't start with the hardest thing first. They start with the easy thing and they get their chops down and then they gradually increase. And we need to think of Surefoot as a progressive system of instability that, with a graded system that you start with the simplest thing and the short duration and you see how the horse responds because I know I've had, people contact me. I had one of my people that was working for me when she started out, she did it short. She listened to me. And then the next time she got excited and left the horse. And then the next day the horse was like, no, I don't feel like, I'm sore.
Yeah. No, a little bit's always, a little bit more is always better. But
And I think with the nervous system, when we're looking at it from the nervous system perspective, that's a totally different time frame than a muscle perspective. Don't you agree? Yes,
I would agree. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
What about the wedge on the front with the heel up or toe up?
So I use I love the slants. I use them heel high. Typically I'll use them in front. Again, if I see a horse long toe, low heel, I'm like, let me give you a little lift and see how you like that. And because it's full foot support and laminated horses for sure. Right. But then some horses don't like it that way. And if you're Dr. Kelleher, who's at Ohio State now, uses it in rehab for DDFT, but when it's ready, she'll turn the pad around and have it heel low and start putting some stretch into that tendon. Right. And that's, you've got to be working with your vet and looking at your ultrasound and making sure the tendon's ready, because this is where I think what I tell people with any kind of tendon injury is do all the other legs. Don't do the one that's injured until the vet says it's okay, because you don't want to cause harm. And I think we forget, our focus gets so tunneled into where the injury is that we forget there's a whole other body.
There's another leg and 3 other legs and yes, a whole body. So absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously, about like the map of the brain and of the body and the brain, human terms, it's the homunculus, but how do you think that what's happening in that map, like with proprioception? And I have another question for you, but let's do that one first.
Okay. No, I use that. I like that map. I like the little homunculus guy because I think it does give us insights into the horse. And so most of our sensory information comes from our head, from our lips, from our tongue, because we just have so many cranial nerves that are dedicated to that area. But then also our hands and our feet less, but more of our hands because we have such fine touch. And so those maps haven't been done in horses, but I just try to step back and think. And I don't know how exactly, most of the time when we have maps like that in people, what those are from like war, when actually people have lost chunks of their brain, or strokes or things like that, where they've mapped these things out. Oh, you have a tumor here and you can't feel your right arm. Okay, well then that section of your brain must have to do something with your right arm. And so that's my understanding how a lot of those maps came. that we've built those because of lots of people that had lots of brain trauma. And so we can't map those for sure in horses. But to me, just from observation, horses smell, they use their lips. That's how they interact with eating, with people, allo grooming. It's all of that. So to me, I think that the head is just as big as in the human. I think the rest of the trunk is probably similar to the human. It's kind of less area. But to me, I think the feet are probably just as big as the hands in humans, that there's probably just as much as, our conversation is, that a lot of that receptor interaction with the ground is coming from the hooves, from the tendons. I think probably tendons more in horses than humans. So, if I had a horse picture, I'd probably have a big, huge flexor tendon on there along with my big hooves to map that out. But I just don't know how far up the leg that goes. Does that, large representation stop at the carpus, and then, you kind of have a little skinny, upper limb and skinny body, and then you got this, from the hock down, it's huge again. I kind of see it that way based on what we think about lameness. We always say most of the 90% of lameness happens from the carpus down and the hock down, but that's nociception. I don't know for sure if that's mechanoreception too. So if that was the case, then, my homunculus would be a big portion of that from the carpus down and the hock down. So that's how I feel. We would also have to put the tail in there.
Yeah.
To me, I think the tail is a big emotional, maybe not so much maybe a sensory component too, but and then I think the ears have to be a big part of that too, which may not be so much from the human perspective. So I guess that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, I that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about the fact that it would be so big from the carpus and the hock down, but that kind of makes sense.
May not be. I'm just making stuff up here, Wendy.
Yeah, it's great. It's good. I love it.
No.
Okay, so my next question is, there's a term that I've heard that's kind of floating around called interoception.
Yep.
So what is interoception?
Interoception is what I'm sensing inside of my body. So if I feel like I'm hungry, if I feel like I have tension in my body. So it includes exteroception is things that I'm seeing on the outside. So it's vision, it's smell, it's taste, it's hearing. It's what I feel from my external environment. It would also be like touch. If I feel like a rough surface or something like that, I'm sensing my outside body. But if I'm sitting here and I kind of feel achy, what I feel inside of myself, I feel kind of stiff. I feel kind of tired. Those are things that are telling my brain what I'm feeling inside of my body. I'm feeling anxious. I feel happy. Those would be all things coming from inside my body. They're influenced by signals from the outside, but that's mostly what your body is telling yourself. This is the status, kind of what the rest of my nervous system is doing inside of my body. So it kind of captures a lot of the parasympathetic, some of the sympathetic. It captures some of the nociception. It captures mechanoreception. So it's kind of a blanket umbrella term for what we're feeling inside of our body.
Yeah. And so, I would assume that horses have that as well. Case in point, a colic, they're going to feel inside the body. And do we know where these things are felt in the human? Like, do we have a idea in the brain where we feel these things?
Yeah. Well, I would say a lot of those probably in your sensory cortex. We obviously have parts of our brain for visual cortex, auditory cortex, speech. All of those are separated in certain parts. I guess we'd have to talk to some of our neurologists, maybe Stephen Peters, I think.
Stephen Peters, yeah. He's great.
Introduced me. And so maybe that would be a conversation we'd have to ask him his opinion on homunculus. I don't know what you call a homunculus and a horse, but
I don't know.
A horse, yeah.
Horse.
I'll have to come up with a name for that one other than, yeah.
Equisunculus? I don't know.
There you go. Something like that. So, yeah. So I don't know where for sure. I'd have to, that's again, beyond my capabilities as far as understanding all the neural pathways, but that would be maybe an avenue to have that conversation. Yeah.
And so now I want to ask you about fascia, because they talk about fascia being another type of nervous system.
Yep.
So can you talk about that and how we look at it that way?
Yeah. Well, I think that's, some of the human research. I've been to a couple of the fascial research conferences and listened to some of the, well-regarded human myofascial people. And some of the research suggests that the fascia is actually one of the most innervated parts of our body. And so I think we just need to have a different concept of what fascia is. Most of the time we just think it's, if you do the dissections, it's that little white tissue that you cut off and you throw in the bucket. But actually what fascia is everything in our body. Our liver is fascia. It just has liver cells stuck in it. Our kidney is fascia. It just has kidney cells. Our skin, it just has different cells stuck into it. So if we took away all that, we just are a big fascial network. And with all of that, all of those receptors are in those areas. So we have fascia within our tendons, within our joint capsules, within the periosteum, the covering on our bone, within parts of our dura. And so all of that is considered connective tissue or fascia. And so all of those are innervated. And so we have sensations from all of that all the time. Most of the time we don't feel that, or we don't consciously are aware of that. That's part of the interoception, is kind of this thing that runs in the background, and we don't feel it unless there's a pain or infection or trauma or something like that warns our nervous system that something's going on. But those systems are always sensing us all the time. That's why I'm setting up straight here and not falling off my chair, because my mechanoreceptors, all of my fascia is telling certain muscles to contract or hold myself in a certain position. And so those systems are running all the time in the background. And I think, fortunately, we've become more aware of that recently. I think with all things, and this in the equine industry, you kind of get these flavors of the month, and everything is. And I think that's kind of where we are a little bit with the fascia and with some of our myofascial lines, is that the pendulum is over here, and because it's something new and different, and we didn't ever know that existed. It's like, well, fascia's existed since time, immortal, but we just kind of figured out and put a name on it. So to me, I think we just need to have that pendulum kind of settle in the middle a little bit and understand a little bit better contextually that is probably not the source of all evil in the horse's body or in our bodies, but it's an avenue or things that we need to think about along with everything else that's happening. Nervous
if
system.
you aren't marveled by the human or horse body, then I don't, I think that one thing, having done Surefoot now for 14 years, is how amazing the horses are, how amazing we are, and how amazing horses are. I just it's a whole nother level of understanding and respect for what they do and how they do it.
Yeah. One of my enlightening, well, I guess I would just say it's a fork in the road that I took. I went through human chiropractic training, and after I graduated from human chiropractic, it's like, okay, am I going to work on humans, continue the training that I learned, or am I going to go work on animals? And just because animals are in my heart, that's the direction that I took. But stepping back, as far as the level of responsiveness, I'm going to just say chiropractic care. Horses are up here by far. Next ones down are probably dogs, cats, and I would put probably humans closer to the bottom, because we hang on to so much stuff. We have emotional baggage. We have other, this treatment's going to cost me so much, and other things going on in our head. The horses are just there.
Yeah.
And they are so true. And as you said, I asked lots of questions. How does this feel for you? What do you want to do? How is this am I heading in the right direction? And just asking the horses, and they won't ever lie to you. And they won't ever have alternative motives. They, whatever going on. So to me, they're just the most honest beings that are around, and just being present. Dogs, sometimes they get distracted, it's like, well, we're squirrel, and they're just like, all right. And then cats are just kind of like hanging out and don't bother me type of thing. So we all have our different nervous systems and how we can access that. But to me, the horses are they're just the premier example of a nervous system, because they're just always aware. The social interaction, to me, it's just a very special gift being around a horse, because they can move fast. They are very flight animals. It can be a very dangerous thing. But if you're in that herd, in an environment and interacting with that being, kind of that, their nervous system and your nervous system together, your emotions, your mental. To me, I guess I've learned over the years to just be able to empty my mind and just be with the horse or be with my patient. And to me, that's just the most intimate type of interaction. And it's the most rewarding and honorable. It's just like I'm touched that the horse allows me to have that conversation with them, to help out with that. So I guess that's where I'm at. So I'm glad I went with the horses and left some of the humans behind. So, yeah.
What you're saying is so true, because, I've spent my career teaching horseback riders. And then I came up with Surefoot, and I can do a riding clinic and be absolutely exhausted with just 12 riders. Yep. I do 8 hours, 10 hours with the horses, and they feed me.
Yep.
And with Surefoot, I think the thing that it's so hard to get across to people but that's the most stunning is how little it takes and how rapidly they respond if you're just present with them and offer or listen. And I tell people, I'm a horse listener. I'm not a whisperer. I listen to them. Yep. And if you listen closely, they will whisper to you and tell you what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing that Surefoot's taught me so amazing, how little it takes, and to be present with them and just offer, just ask.
Yep. Give them a space and just see what happens. Yep.
Yeah. Great.
So Wendy, I have one other question. What about, we have a lot of these horses that have asymmetric front feet. I don't like the term high-low, but that's the term that's out there, because it's a lot more complicated than that. But just say a balance, asymmetry, hoof size, shape, angle, those type of things. What's your approach? Do you specifically, on the horse that has a little bit more flatter, are you putting a certain pad on that one, and then the other one that's a little bit more upright, you're putting a different pad there, or are you just asking again the horse what they want?
I just love this question. So I'll start with flat pads, right? And just introduce that and get that done. And then once they are very comfortable with a couple of the different densities going into more unstable surfaces, I have pods. Have you ever seen the pods? They're
not
domes.
yours. I've seen Bosie balls and other pods.
Okay, so they're about 7-inch diameter, half ball with nubs. And I will put the horses, I'll send you pictures. I'll put the horses on that, and you'll see the pattern. And then you walk them off, right? You don't let them stay there. And you just repeat it a few times. And I've literally watched horses play, and you can watch their pasterns, and they'll start experimenting, and then they'll find more level. Now, is it something that they would need to see on a fairly regular basis, depending on how committed they were into that pattern? Sure. But because it's air filled and it has, I think, some more contact with the sole because of the nubs, you can literally watch the horses experiment with it. And then sometimes if I have a horse that has a real asymmetry, I'll stack them just 1 foot, and I'll put them into their pattern. This is classic Feldenkrais, right? Go with their pattern. And I put them into their pattern, and then I'll switch it up and say, but what about this other idea? And And so I'll use stacking and I'll use pods, and I'll even stack pods on top of pads in some cases. Yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun.
What would be your limit? How many pods?
Oh, well.
Because to me, you're going to get a lot of instability and maybe an unsafe situation.
So again, you don't start stacking until horses are really comfortable. And this is where Felicitas von Neumann-Cosell, who's one of my biggest fans, one day I saw a picture on Facebook. I'm like, what are you doing? And I ran up there to see, because she's not far. She's in Maryland. And she will stack horses 3 high in front and with different densities. Now, again, these horses, her horses are very familiar with surefoot, and this is not where you start. But I have stacked horses as much as 3 high.
Wow.
So we're talking 6 inches, 6 to 7 inches of pad.
Wow.
Because I have a 3-inch block that I can use.
Right.
Too. But again, it really, I think the hard thing is people see like horses on 4 pads or horses stacked. And that's like, not you've got to start with simple and slow and low, right?
But what would be an indication? Why would you do 2 pads?
Horses that are low withered, that are low in front, croup high, you stack them up and they're like, and they totally change their perception of the world. And they're like, wow, this is what it feels like to be uphill.
Okay. I understand that. Okay.
Yep. And then some horses, like I've stacked behind, like I'm trying to think of an instance right now, but just something told me like to stack them behind, and I'll stack them, slant on a pad behind, and you look at them and you see how you're literally putting them into the forehand, and they're like, oh, this is awesome. So,
okay.
I think the thing is it's really listening to the horse. It's really experimenting and taking your time, and offering. And if they don't want it, they'll step off. Yep. Like I had a barrel racer that was really stuck, former barrel racer, couldn't turn right, stacked it 3 high on its right front and nothing on its left front. And it was like I had
really,
yeah.
And he would stand and bear weight on that.
Loved it.
Wow.
Right. Yawning, licking and chewing, all the signs of relaxation. So sometimes, with the front legs, when I put them on pads, I watch that when I put a pad under the foot, do I see the sternum tilt or does it stay straight? And so when I'll do like 2 pads on a horse, like 2 on 1 foot, right? I'm watching to see, is that shoulder blade actually sliding and the sternum is staying straight and the shoulder blade sliding, or is it stuck and the whole thing is rotating over? And that's where I think you can, by playing with stacking, you can see, okay, that scapula is sliding. Nope, that one's not sliding. When I do it this way, the horse rotates. When I do it this way, the sternum stays sturdily straight. And you can start to bring about differences, like more feeling and ability, because the shoulders need to slide, but they also need to stabilize, right? They got to do both jobs.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times these horses in the front end get, stuck on one side and sliding on the other. So then you get the rotation and, I can't get my horse to canter on one.
Do you do perturbations? Because oftentimes what I'll do is just like weight shifting. We'll just take the withers or the pelvis and have them shifting purposefully while they're standing on the pad or not standing on the pads or on the pads. Do you use perturbations like that?
Sometimes. Usually I'm seeing horses that the pads alone are.
Yeah.
Because I'm not seeing horses in a therapeutic setting. I'm not seeing them week after week. So there are some cases where, you can feel like if you just take a hold of the withers, you can feel, that moves that way, but it's not moving this way. And
absolutely.
Little tiny things. So, yes, but I don't do a lot of it because that's not my setting.
Okay. Yep.
Yep.
And what about the forever chicken and the egg question, as far as, again, your hoof imbalances and your scapular asymmetries? What's your perspective? Is it coming from the feet or is it coming from the withers?
It
depends.
It depends. Yeah, thank you. It depends. But I will tell you that there are some horses that are so stuck in the front that they can't tolerate surefoot pads, or they won't stay on them very long. So I've seen that with a number of horses where the front end is just, they can't adapt in the shoulders to the pads, so they have to walk off. They're just that immobile. And that's, so you need to come in some other treatment and free things up. But it's a good indicator if your horse won't stay on the pads in front. You need to start looking at why. And that's where I think people get stuck with, oh, my horse doesn't like it. It's like, no, you missed the message, right? You missed the thing that was why. You didn't ask the next question. And I think it's so important that we think about what's the next question. Okay, this is what I see, but what's the question? And then when we start to investigate that, it's like, well, wait a second, the horse won't stay or can't stay. And you'll start to realize it's really more can't stay than won't stay. And when you ask it that way, then it's like, well, why can't it stay? And then you get into another line of questioning. And so I think that I wish more people would think about it from a curious perspective, investigation, as opposed to a thing that I do to my horse. Right?
Yeah.
So go ahead, because I have a question.
And as you're aware, we have the recent rage about caudal cervical vertebral malformations and instability. And we have a lot of horses that have hypermobility issues, and lots of scapulothoracic instability, caudal, cervical thoracic. Are the pads, I go back and forth. To me, sometimes the pads are the worst thing, and sometimes the pads are the best thing. So how can you guide us through that process?
Right. So the first thing I got to tell you is I'm not a vet and I can't diagnose. So unless the person comes and tells me that their horse has ECVM, I don't know.
Right. But you have horses that you have instability, some hypermobility.
Yep. And I think you have to be super careful. And the reason I say that is that if this horse has some kind of problem, right, undiagnosed or diagnosed, and you take away the compensation, what have they got left?
Right.
And that's my biggest concern. So when someone comes to me and says, my horse has ECVM, I'm like, I do not recommend you use, and you asked me this earlier, I forgot about this, but I don't recommend using surefoot pads because I don't know if you take away that horse's compensatory pattern, if they don't have the structures and the places for the muscles to attach, what are they going to do? So I've seen horses, and I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's very rare, but I'll have, you see sway, right? There's postural sway, and then there's sway on surefoot. And then every once in a while, you'll see it where especially it's really easy to watch on a Western saddle. You'll see the rib cage go tick-tock, 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 quick, really quick, tick-tock, 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 and then it'll stabilize. And it's like in free fall. And the only way I can think about it is you've got your shrugger muscles, right? If they're holding at the top of the scapula, or you've got your thoracic sling. Well, what if everything lets go? Right? And then the rib cage, you'll see it. It's very rapid. I don't see it a lot anymore, but I think it's because I've changed my process and reduced it down. But I've seen it where it's like this really rapid movement, and the guy was in a Western saddle, so you could see the horn. So
interesting.
That's a really interesting pattern that like I said, I don't see it nearly as much as I used to, but I think it's because I use harder pads, so I'm not creating that instability fast. But it is a really interesting. The horses don't seem distressed by it. But it's like the rib cage is just in free fall. Okay. And then it'll catch. And then, go ahead.
Do you think you can strengthen a horse? Because we've talked about mechanoreception, more, awareness, but do you think you can actually make a horse stronger?
Yes, in that with careful application and progressive use of the increasing instability, just like an athlete, you can, and this is where there's some discussion about sway and how much sway is good, and if that's too much sway and all that sort of stuff. When I see a horse start to sway, if it's early on, like it's only the first session or so, I'll move them. I won't let them sway a lot. But if they're used to pads and they know they can leave, right? And I think that's a big piece. They can choose. Then I'll let them stay a little longer. And you'll see, like, I literally have video of the muscles around the stifle activating from the horse. And I know that, what's the woman, the vet at the rehab center in Kentucky, Spy Coast, uses it a lot for stifle rehab.
Okay. Yep.
So yes, I think you can definitely, and you can also warm up the system. I literally had people stop lunging horses and just use surefoot pads to warm their horses up, which, you know, you figure if you are having to deal with that instability, you are activating things and you're starting to warm up, and it's probably a lot less stressful than lunging tense.
Yep. Well, it's a lot more natural too, other than forced going in a circle, you know, whatever diameter you're doing. But another question for you. What is your definition of core stability?
Oh, that's a great question. Because I talk about the difference between core strength and core stability. Because from the rider perspective, when I teach riders, I see so many of them working on core strength, but that inhibits good function because it's out of sequence with the activity.
Yep.
I'm looking for core stability, meaning that you can stabilize, right, and still have the freedom of movement. In other words, it has to be appropriate to the activity.
Absolutely.
And the thing that I used to always go back to is I used to watch the Tour de France all the time, right? For a while there, every year I'd watch it. I'd watch these guys go up the mountains and they'd open their jerseys and you could see their belly pushed out. It wasn't tight, right? And so, you know, we got kind of this craze of core strength and holding, and that just creates restriction. And in riders, it interferes with their hip function.
Yep.
So stability for me is, and it's, yes, the abdominal muscles are part of that, but I think also about the muscles that run along the underside of the spine as well as the top line of the
Absolutely.
spine.
And the abdominal muscles.
Right. And people tend to forget that there's, and I forgot their names, but, you know, there's little tiny muscles that run on the underline of the spine, and then they disappear at the diaphragm, and then they reappear in psoas, right? And the diaphragm roots right in.
Yep.
So we have to be able to stabilize the spine from top and bottom. And yes, the abdominal is involved, but, you know, with a horse, there's 360 pounds of guts in between the back and the bottom.
Yes, there are. Yeah. And I think the other important part of that is we oftentimes forget about the sides.
Yes.
And that's what, you know, the physiotherapists have taught me. It's not just about having the six-pack abs. It's about the box. And you have to have the front, the back, and the sides. And then the top and the bottom too to help out with that. So
I have a horse simulator that I can put my riders on, and I'll go up to their sides and I'll push on their sides and, you know, knock them right off the horse. And they're like, whoa, what are you doing? It's like, you got to have front. It's like, it's a can. You got to have all sides of the can solid.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. That's great.
Okay. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I have, in doing some reading, I have come across a hormone released by the bones called osteocalcin, which they are saying that is released to trigger flight reflex. In other words, in the research that I read talked about in people that don't have adrenal glands and mice without adrenal glands, you can still have panic attacks because the osteocalcin is triggering the sympathetic nervous system. Are you familiar with this? Oh, you froze.
It's completely over my head.
Oh,
I would have to do some research on that one.
It's really interesting. And the reason I find it so interesting is that they're saying that this hormone is released in everything with a skeleton, all mammals, right? Like it's because we have bones, and we have bones in our inner ears. So then you have to wonder about those bones. And the reason I'm interested in it is that when I go to put a horse's foot on a pad, I'm not just concerned about the pad. When I pick up the foot, I want to feel what joints are available. And like, do I feel that there's movement in the pastern, in the carpus, in the elbow, in the shoulder? Or are they just moving in one place? Or can they not pick up their foot at all because it's so braced against the ground? And so, you know, my thinking goes, well, if this hormone is causing flight reflex and this horse's leg is this stiff to the ground, then are we already pushing the sympathetic system into a state of potential flight, you know? And because as I do surefoot with these horses and I feel a change in the fluidity of the limbs, we see the change in behavior.
Yeah, well, I think all of that is back again to your mechanoreception. So I just want to do a quick Google on osteocalcin, but that's not how I'm just thinking back in my deep recesses of everything I've learned and forgotten. Osteocalcin regulates glucose metabolism, testosterone, and muscle mass.
It's an interesting, it does a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's a protein in bone and expressed by osteoblasts, which are the little cells that form the bone. Yeah, so that was my understanding, that it's more for bone formation, but I don't know about stress.
Yeah, there's some research that came out, and what I'll try and send you the references.
Okay.
Because, I mean, the thing is, it's all happening, right? And in science, we try, because I was in research for years. I studied hormones in horses, right?
Okay.
Luteinizing hormone and estrus and overactivized mares a million years ago now with Bob Loy and Barry Fitzgerald. I've applied to CSU and they never responded to me, so I went to UK.
Okay.
That was a long time ago, but it's so difficult, and I think for Surefoot, this is one of the difficulties: is how do you isolate things to actually study them to see the influence that they have? Because this is a whole system, and that's the hardest thing. It can't talk to us, right? It can't, like, at least humans can report back to us what they experience. It can't talk back to us in that way. And so it's so difficult to tease apart an elegant way to look at what things are being influenced.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very complex, and it goes back to what you said earlier. It depends on the question that you are asking. If you are asking how this makes you feel, then there are tests that test more behavioral or things along those lines. If you talk about, biomechanics, then you can do that. If you want to talk about muscle tone or talk about performance, then it just depends on the question. But as you said, and that's what makes it so wonderful. It's just such a big complex, and everything interacts. And hopefully, I don't know, I was going through veterinary school and did my internship. And one of the ambulatory veterinarians, he says, you're very thankful that you work on animals because most of the time they're going to get better despite what you do with them. And so it's like, that's wonderful. So just kind of, as you said, just step back and kind of help ask a few questions and guide the process, because there's just way too much other things going on that I have no control over at all. So, yeah. So
somebody's just written, I've used the pads on several ECVM horses and have felt that it was increasing their stability and ability to stay more equally upright. Most of these horses are FEI level competitors. I have thought that structurally other muscles, ligaments may be benefiting, and that I was helping to aid the strength and performance. Do either of you know any data that would indicate I'm hurting them? I think the thing that she's saying here, she's already starting with FEI level horses that are going to be incredibly fit.
That was my comment too.
Yeah.
You have a very select population there. And so I think what you're doing is just another little guide to help those horses. But if you had horses that didn't have that fitness, that stability, it would probably be a very different situation and result. Yeah.
Right. And that's why, from my perspective, I am not a vet, and you need to, with anything like that, with neurologic horses or anything, you need to bring your vet in on that conversation. Yeah, she says, yeah, they're very fit. And so I think you're probably actually helping them with pads to just relax in the places they don't need to hold.
And just a little fine tuning, as you deal with elite athletes, you just need a little fine tuning here and there. So,
Yeah. Oh, and she's a vet. Yay. Okay. Good. We should talk. We should have you come on for a webinar. No. That would be really interesting. So, yeah. And that's the thing is, it can help horses at so many levels. And for the most part, it's quite safe. And I think that as modalities go, kind of from the beginning of our conversation, things that are simple and easy to do that don't require a lot of training that horse owners can do for their horses. And then, you can take it to a whole nother level in terms of FEI horses and therapies and rehab and performance. And that's the beauty of it. It can fit in with other modalities. I always say it's only limited by your imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are some people that don't have very much imagination, but yes, no, you're kind of stuck in the box, but no.
Yeah, but more and more, I think we're starting to broaden that perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You certainly see it, I think, in the farrier world. It seems like there's been a big educational level that's happened in the past, say, 20 years, where they're really starting to look at things in a different way and experiment and look outside of their, little box.
Yeah.
And
much needed.
Yep. And I think we're doing that more and more with horses in general, because we have to, right? This is where I go back to the welfare piece, that a horse that's willing and pain-free is going to go a lot further than a horse that isn't. And we have to recognize it faster and sooner so that we get everything going on the right track.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Haussler, I don't know if you have any more questions for me, but
no, it's been a great time.
I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. I'm probably going to ask you to come back at some point next year, and we'll have another. And I think I'll be on your compendium. Do you want to give a little plug for that?
Sure. Yes. I have a educational center called veterinarycompendium.org. And mostly what we're trying to do is just to bring people together similar to this. We're having different perspectives and just having conversations, how we can best help the animals. And most of the conversation has been around horses, but definitely I have, a past life working with dogs and cats and exotics too. So just, depending on what your background is, just trying to get together so we can all come together and have a common conversation similar to what we did here. So,
and how can they find out more about it?
We have a website, Vet Compendium, vetcompendium.org, or Facebook page, Vet Compendium or Veterinary Compendium, both of those. Deanna Drendel helps us out with that as far as managing and answering questions and trying to promote events. We actually have an event coming up in 2 weeks or next week on impinged spinous processes, trying to understand that, back problems, and so and sacroiliac problems after that. So, and we've talked about pain, we've talked about behavior. So lots of different topics. And so if you're interested in some of those webinars, or we have community gatherings similar to this here, where we get together with different people and have different conversations. So you're all welcome to do that. Our next one, community gathering, is going to be talking about the veterinary shortage and have a couple perspectives from physical therapists, body workers, how maybe some of the non-veterinarians can come together and help support where we don't have veterinarians available in all areas, or time, or availability to help out some of the animals. So just trying to, again, broaden that network of people that have opportunities to contribute to help the horses out.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know if you've spoken to Dr. Madeline Ward. She is very much, yeah, she's great. And we've had conversations on the webinars about the vet shortage and what can we do about it. So great. And Deanna, if you just send me an email with that information, we'll put it into the notification when we tell everybody about this webinar.
Okay. That sounds
Thank you so much, Dr. Haussler. Have a great day.
You're welcome. Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate it.